talk about these really quick. Spelling, it's a time spelling test where you give kids words, and then you actually have, depending on the measure, on the grade level, you give students 7 or 12 seconds between words. So it's actually timed on how frequently you give the word. So, you know, there is a time constraint on it, which some kids struggle with. And then there's a writing assessment too. The hardest thing about the writing assessment, to some degree spelling, but spelling's not as bad as writing. Writing's really hard to grade, but believe it or not, we're getting to a point where, and I'm going to learn more about this later this week at a conference I'm going to where students can now kind of type. So you give kids a story starter, which I actually use as an instructional practice, but you give them a story starter that's something goofy or, you know, something exciting. Johnny turned the corner and there stood a big grizzly bear, and then that's just a story starter, and then they have to just write. With this assessment, you give them a story starter that they've generated, and then they write for like 3 minutes. And then you can count the number of words they wrote and or analyze the appropriate punctuation, all these different things. Grading is a little problematic, but we're getting to a point, and I'm sure it's actually already out there somewhere, it probably costs some money though, where students type their story, and then it just automatically produces a score. When that starts happening and that's really dialed in, you'll see more people using writing curriculum-based measure. It's actually quite time intensive. Okay, then you have DIBELS. DIBELS is now kind of old. A little bit of my background, I did my PhD at the University of Oregon, and I was in a stats class when one of the developers of DIBELS came into the class and said, we just launched TrentAIMsWeb. That was somewhere around 12 years ago now. So I've kind of been involved with DIBELS one way or the other for a long time, but actually I've been more involved with it since I left Oregon and got involved in preparing teachers. So I can never remember how to pronounce that, but IDEL, which is the Spanish version of DIBELS. And then you have DIBELS Next, which is the new DIBELS. So DIBELS is so old that they now have DIBELS Next, which is better than the old DIBELS. And I know that, and people, you can be confident about this because I was actually one of the principal investigators on norming the DIBELS Next passages. And I can't tell you exactly where, but we actually did that huge research project somewhere in northwest Montana. So if anyone ever says DIBELS isn't relevant to kids in Montana, DIBELS Next was actually tested on kids in this area. It was a huge study that I would never want to do again. 5,000 data points in a month. 5,000 reading passages. And I had a research team of 12 or 13 people camped out in a school for about, in 2 schools for more than a month. And it was intense, but it made the passages better. Here's how it made them better. The old DIBELS, you'd give a student, there were like these passages that teachers could tell you, your daughter, well, maybe not kindergarten, but when you get into oral reading fluency, there were these passages where teachers just knew students were going to score poorly on, or like read 1 million words a minute, which is telling you it's not a good passage because it should be somewhere in the neighborhood, you know. But there were these curveball passages. So this project was to like really get these reading passages dialed in. And the research, the analyses we did shows that is in fact what happened. My point in showing you all this is the comprehensive nature of TrentAIMsWeb, and that it's not just one measure, it's actually a lot of different measures. And as you learn more about assessment, you can put any measure in AIMsWeb. I'm going to show you this now, what you're going to focus on in this course. So, progress monitoring. It's hard for me just to jump right into this without a little bit of context. That progress monitoring is, well, it's assessing kids on a regular basis. But there's a degree of how often you assess kids. So, some kids, you're perfectly fine. Well, frankly, you'd probably be perfectly fine never assessing them. But for the sake of being careful, you want to assess kids 3 times a year. This is all within a response to intervention, or what's now being called multi-tiered system of student support. I think I have that right. But you would assess all kids 3 times per year with these brief measures. Schools are doing it all the time, all over the country. Teams of people do this all in a day, or 2 maybe, assess everyone in the school. They got it dialed in to where they put it right into, their iPhone, or, and it uploads the data, and they have an instant report of the kids in their class and in their school and potentially in their district. Some kids who you learn in a previous assessment that they need some sort of more intensive intervention, you would assess those kids approximately once a month. And then that group of kids who need a lot of intervention could be kids who would eventually find themselves in special education. You would assess them more like once every 2 weeks. Now, the beauty of doing that is that you assess everyone in the school. Oh man, this kid, they are struggling a little bit, so you give them some more help and you assess them more often to see if what you're doing is actually helping them. Kids who struggle a lot, you can give them immediate attention, right? So you're not waiting until 2nd or 3rd grade when it's obvious they're way behind all their peers. This could be done within 2 weeks of them starting school. So, this child's struggling a little bit compared to all their peers in their same neighborhood, in their same classroom. We're going to put resources into helping that student get caught up right away. They start to make progress. That's what we call responding to an intervention. Then it's obvious they don't need special ed because we just gave them some extra help and they respond to the intervention. Some kids will respond quicker than others. Some kids may not respond at all. It's not a great term, but a term that's often used is we might call those kids non-responders, right? So those are the kids who we may want to then put in special education to provide them with the most intensive supports and services that we have to offer, okay? There's your snapshot of what response to intervention is. What you're going to focus on is what's referred to in AIMsWeb as progress monitoring, right? I think all of what I just described is actually progress monitoring. It's just on a different frequency. But what you're going to focus on is kids who you would need to assess more frequently. Within AIMsWeb, the kids who you would assess once a month, that's called strategic monitoring. And the kids who you would assess every 2 weeks or so, that's called progress monitoring.